Good morning. Welcome to You Can't Say That. I'm Greg.
And I'm Al. Looking forward to it today, man. It's a cold day here in Roanoke. Oh my goodness. Icy cold.
Yeah, I've got a picture. So this is what it looks like outside here on the mountain. Let me find it.
At the Aldridge Resort. Yeah, let's see. Let's looking out the window.
I don't know how much of a resort it would qualify as, but here we go. All right, so this is outside my window. And if you notice all the sticks and limbs and stuff laying on the ground, that's really not the worst of it. It's
Wow.
bad up here. I mean, the roads, we had blocked roads. My driveway was blocked in 3 places. There's trees down everywhere. What you notice most about this picture is you can't see off the mountain. Up there in the top left over the tree line, you should see a valley and another mountain, but you can't because it's the rain is so thick and heavy you can't see through it.
Hmm.
Anyway,
How'd it feel up there? You feel nice and secluded?
oh yeah, I mean we can't see anybody else ever all the time from here.
What's your closest neighbor?
Um, I guess the neighbor that's east of me. And if I walk up to the top of the ridge behind my house, I can see across his yard. He's got a much bigger area cleared and than I do down here. We live mostly in the woods. We got a small area cleared that's a yard, but for the most part we just live in the woods. He's got a really big. It's a lot.
But I know we're not going to have to do this because you're very self-sufficient. But if we have to stage a rescue to get Aldridge and Elizabeth out, we may have to swoop in, and we'll maybe use his area as a staging area to get into you.
If we can't get out, you can't get in. It's one of those things where I probably should just jump on the 4-wheeler and we should just take the ATV off the mountain. If you can't get the Jeep out, well, I mean, if you can't get the Jeep out, should we be out?
That's true. Well, the other idea I may have is just sending in the National Guard and come on. Well, maybe get him out of D.C. and we'll head over to Greg's place. What do you think, man?
We're fine. Barring medical emergencies, it's okay if we're stuck
fine. Well, talking about the National Guard, as I make that segue into it, what do you think? What do you think? I hear a lot of rumbling now from a lot of Republican senators. We've had a little rumbling, but it's getting a little more heightened that this is becoming something, and they kind of knew it, but they're making a little more noise. What do you think?
Well, I mean, historically, and this is where I go with these things, is to talk about historically how does this work and what happens and how do people react to things, because nothing's ever new. It's always the same stuff over and over again. You just have to pay careful attention to how these things play out, historically over the last 1,000 years as they play out over and over and over again, and you see the patterns. And the same stuff always happens. We're doing what 100 other civilizations have done before us. This is not new. We're just doing it with smartphones and internal combustion engines and a rocket ship that can go to the moon. But as far as the political interactions and power struggles, the Game of Thrones, nothing changes. It's the same. It's always the same thing. So, sending troops to D.C. I mean, this is what you see. This is what you see dictators and communists and communist countries. This is what happens. At some point, they realize that there's unrest and their reign is threatened. And so they use the mechanism of government, which they have taken control of, and they rape it for resources to protect themselves. So right now, those resources are money and military power, and they're using them to protect themselves so that they can maintain control. It's not for us. They didn't spend $500 million fortifying D.C. and putting troops all over the place and locking down their offices and the Capitol building and all of that. They didn't do that for our safety. They didn't do that so
Right.
we'd have a freer country. They did that because they know that they've created such a mess. Everybody's angry, everybody's upset, and that their reign over us is threatened by people who are going to say enough is enough. Now, that was a little bit of the sentiment that you saw on January 6th at the Capitol. I mean, there were many people that felt that way. Some of them were on the right and some of them were on the left, and we can all argue about who did what to whom, but it doesn't, for the purposes of what's going on, that really doesn't matter. What's going on is the leadership of our country, our political class, is using our money and our military to protect themselves from us. It's as pure and simple as that. And that's what communists, dictators, kings and queens, this is not new, and it's only going to get worse. We're never going to unlock down D.C. I mean, the idea that this was temporary, that was a farce. It's not temporary.
Well, although if you look at other times that we brought in national troops, I mean, my recollection, and I was not really here for a lot of it. I was overseas, but it was a lot to do with segregation. It seemed like a lot of the schools I remember bringing in the National Guard to segregate. I think in Alabama, Mississippi, you had Little Rock, Arkansas, you had at the university. You've had a lot of times where we brought in troops and then they've left. I mean, they came in for a specific purpose. Now, to me, when we had all these riots going on during the summer and people were actually being killed and burned down buildings and all that, you know, Trump was kind of hands off because I guess he was figuring that the states, that's their deal. If they want the troops to come in, he would bring them in, but no one asked for them.
Right. It was reported that that's what he wanted to do. And the states where they were having that trouble told him no. And he acquiesced to their wishes. And honestly, that's the way it should work, because we're not.
Let me ask you, so let me ask you a question on that. We say it's the way it should work. The only thing I looked at is these are U.S. citizens. So forget about being a citizen of Alabama or, you know, whatever state that was in Seattle, Washington State or Oregon. These are U.S. citizens that are being killed. It seemed like a president would have some right to come in and say, hey, you know, your government is allowing you to be killed. That's serious stuff. I mean, we got to the point this summer where I had never seen this before, where actual government officials were opening doors for rioters to go into government buildings. I'd never seen that before. And you would think at that point, you got U.S. citizens now that are in harm's way, and no one's doing anything.
Well, it's not the responsibility of the president of the United States to secure the neighborhoods of individual states with federal resources. It's the job of our state and local government to do that.
Well, what if it's a state allowing it to happen? I mean, I'm not saying a little crime where the state wants to prevent it, but when the state is actually involved in it,
then you need to get rid of the leadership of your state. And see,
but how long do you wait? That comes up in a year or two.
This is why we're in a precarious position, because the answer to this is to if your leadership of your state is purposefully allowing criminals,
which it was,
to hurt people, destroy things for political purposes, then they've broken the law. They violated their oath. They need to be removed from office. And I don't mean voted out at the next election. And see, this is what I mean about the precarious position, because what needs to happen in that situation is those leaders need to be drug out of their offices, replaced by somebody else, and they need to be prosecuted. They need to be put in jail. They need to be prosecuted for crimes. And new leaders need to be put in place, and it needs to happen quickly. But see, to do that, and that's what needs to happen at the federal level too, but to do that from the perspective of the government, that's insurrection. They don't look at it as I'm acting criminally, I'm violating my oath of office, and I'm using my power and position to violate the citizens under my control, and therefore I should be removed. They look at it like, this is what I get to do, and if you try to do anything about it, that's insurrection. Now you're the one law breaking, and that's what they're saying about the people in D.C. Nobody storms the Capitol and causes chaos in the numbers that they claim this was happening in the situation that this was going on in. If there's not at the root of it something that deserves that attention. And the more they violate us, Al, the more the political class uses the power of all levels of government for their own gain and against us, the more it's going to seem necessary that we physically take control of that situation, because the system isn't going to protect us. The system is not going to allow us to remove them. It's not going to allow us to elect new people. The system is going to keep them in place, and it's going to protect them. This is why there was a revolution in the 18th century against the King of England, because there was no reasonable governmental mechanism for dealing with the crime and dealing with the protection of the people. So they had to physically overthrow that government.
All right, but let me ask you this question, Greg. I mean, I get where you're going. The only issue I have is that we can't keep having revolutions, right? I mean, you just don't get anywhere. So it seems interesting our founding fathers knew the kind of mentality that men had when they governed over people. They knew it was going to happen like this. Where were these mechanisms put in place to deal with it? Because I tell you, we do it, you do it because you think it's the right thing to do. You throw them out, you put someone else in. Then the next person on the other side says, hey, wait, you do it, and then they throw you out. I mean, it's a never-ending where we just keep doing it and we become a third-rate country. You know, the difference between us and third-rate countries is we do it in a civilized way where there is no bloodshed.
The difference is that for a period of time, we were able to deal with things in that way because of the system that was set up and the culture of our citizens. But that's done. And I think the point you're missing out on is the default position for human beings is to behave this way. The answer to the problem is not to never have a revolution and just let people continue to be abused. Revolution after revolution after revolution is the natural order of things. I know you don't like it, but that's just what you do.
Right. The only problem, no, it's not that I don't like it. I mean, well, I don't like it.
You don't like it.
I mean,
but
the thing is, it just destroys a country.
You've said it before. You would prefer to stay locked in the system, be abused by your government, and you would do that forever, continuing to try to work within the system. Remember, there was no level at which you personally would say enough is enough. So we're kind of on opposite sides of this situation.
Right. You may be putting some words in my mouth. All I'm doing is when I look at, hold on. When I look at other countries around the world, the big difference with us is that we have somewhat, just let me go with this for a minute, somewhat of a stability. The problem is when you keep going into revolutions, you become like South America, you become like Africa. It just never ends. Or, okay, so there are two looks at this. One is dictatorship, where it's authoritarian, where you never have any revolutions because they got you clamped down. The other one is, on the other side, is you can always have revolutions because you throw some dictators, they're too weak, they get overthrown. South America, maybe Africa, you got wars all the time, and they progress nowhere.
All right, but
they're still in caves. And you got America that's somewhere in the middle.
I get that, but all these countries are not equal. All these situations are not the same. Many of the places that you talk about, the reason why there's revolution after revolution is because external forces like our Central Intelligence, like MI6, like Mossad, like the Russian KGB, like, the other governing entities around the world are using clandestine and sometimes right in your face military to cause unrest and instability in these countries. They keep having revolutions because we keep making them have revolutions, because we're using them as a proxy, so we can fight with our enemies around the world without fighting directly with them. We fight with them, in Korea. We fight with them in Vietnam. We fight with them in the Middle East. We don't fight United States versus China. The United States and China has a war, but we use Taiwan. So we destabilize Taiwan. And we support them on one side. China fights them on the other side. So you can't really look at all of those the same and derive from them that the same kind of dynamics are happening and judge them equally, because we're responsible for a lot of that. Not just us.
All right.
Us and China, the NATO, the Russians, the Asian Pac, India and Pakistan, everybody, including Middle Eastern countries, they have their fingers in the political goings on of all kinds of countries around the world. And so they're helpless. As bad as things are here, in those places, it's even worse because not only do they have a government abusing them, they've got external governments abusing them so they can fight each other. And whether that be...
Right, so let me ask you this question, knowing that we may be shut off YouTube forever by asking this question, but so if Greg Aldridge was superior commander of America and we had it that way, I mean, how would you fix these issues, knowing that it's kind of in mankind to want power and to want to take it and all that? How do you deal with what we have now? Like, how would you have dealt with the whole thing going on in Washington State where people were burning down police stations and all that? As president, supreme leader of, you would have just sat back and said, you guys do what you want to do? Or what would you have said to the people in Washington State dealing with their government?
I would have used, since they won't take help and they refuse help, and the federal government does not have the authority to go in and deal with the internal criminal acts of its citizens, then if they wouldn't accept help, then I would have used what resources I could to expose their leadership as frauds, to show what they were doing purposefully to cause the problem, allow the problem, fund the problem, logisticize the problem to make sure they bust enough people in to make the riot happen. I would use what investigative and communication resources I had as president to expose that situation so their citizens would at least have all the information and they would know what their mayors and their governors and their general assembly of the state were doing.
That, don't you think? Some of that was done. Some of that was done over the summer, it seems like.
Not really.
So what happened if that didn't work? Like, they don't care. They're fine. I mean, that state's just gone. You just let it go. If they don't respond, people keep getting killed. They take over police stations, and they set up their anonymous zones where we just don't do anything if the people don't respond.
If in that situation, if you can prove in court that their leadership, their elected officials are purposefully doing this to them, then that's actually a federal crime. So you can arrest them and have a legitimate trial according to the rules of the system. What should happen is the people of that state need to get off their butt and deal with the problem.
Yeah. No.
I mean, that's why this centralized control that we've slid into in the last century in the United States is very dangerous. The federal government's job is not to police 50 states and keep control of them. The states are sovereign. If there's a problem in Virginia needs to be dealing with it. And we'll fight it out amongst ourselves, and we need to fix the problem. But the last thing we need is an all-powerful centralized federal government to come in and solve it for us and give us a solution that we're forced with.
Yeah, but I could see, in the way we have it now, I could see a very unpopulated state that people from the outside, from foreigners, people that have different views of a representative republic, they don't like the dictator, they go into that state and they basically take it over. And so you got one state out of 50 has definitely changed their rules, their laws. They don't even abide by anything anymore. And they take over by military force and no one cares because they all want it that way. And then you got this one state, and it seems like it's kind of it could happen in America. If you're saying they're sovereign,
that's how if California wants to leave the union, they never signed any agreement saying they would stay forever. I mean, neither did the southern states in the 19th century. There's nothing in the Constitution that makes membership mandatory in perpetuity. If your state says, you know what, we had a good run. Y'all have a nice life. We're out of here. That's their prerogative. We're not a central government. We're not a country that has been divided up into political divisions. We are 50 sovereign countries that have agreed under a loose set of rules how they will work together to create an agent on their behalf to do a few things. That's what the United States is supposed to be. That's still what's on paper. That's not how it's treated. We're not afforded that freedom anymore. Now they act like, well, if Washington wants to leave, they're insurrectionists. No, insurrection is when you try to take over the government, not when you say, love you, mean it, have a nice life, we're out of here. That's not insurrection.
Right. Well, although if I was going to take over America, I would find those 10 states that have populations of less than 500,000. Maybe, I mean, there are those states out there. I think it's South Dakota or North Dakota or Montana. You take them over, you go in there, get their government, you get senators, and now you're into Congress, you're into the U.S. House of Representatives, you're into the Senate, and you're changing America.
How do you think we got here? That's what communists from all over the world did to us for the last 120 years, Al. Muslims, Chinese, I mean, every constituency group that's wanting to expand themselves and their power around the world has sent citizens into the United States to have children, to grow up here, and to get involved in our government and take it over. That's what the Muslim community is doing.
I would just go into those very less populated states. You can do it pretty simply.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, they went to Michigan. So first the Muslims took over not Flint. Which Michigan city is it?
Dearborn. I think it's Dearborn.
Exactly. Yeah. But they've got enclaves all over the country. They get elected to office one by one. They slowly take over. Why do you think our government is so pro-Muslim and anti-Jew a lot of the time? It's because they've infiltrated the control of our government. They have influence over the people of power. And if you let it continue, I mean, we're being invaded from the south by Mexico and South America. If you can't beat somebody militarily, you just move in, you pretend to assimilate, you get elected to office, and you get enough of you that you have a majority, and you take over. They'll take us over.
But then, going back to what we were talking about, that would be okay. Like if Mexico, if any of our border states want people to just come into their state illegally, take over, we should be okay with it and just take it. We lose control of it.
But that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that the borders of the United States are the responsibility of the federal government, and it's their job to keep out invaders. It's their job to apply the law and immigration and how you cross the border. And the states themselves have violated that by just letting people in and flipping a bird to the law. The problem isn't that these are sovereign states. In some things are not sovereign. If you look at the Constitution, states are not given the ability to coin their own money. They're not given the ability to run a post office. These are things that were given to the federal government, and they're not given the ability to set the policy for our national borders. That's done by the federal government. They violated that. If everybody were following
the general life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you have people in Portland, Oregon, or in Seattle taking over and killing people. I would think that your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is definitely being denied.
But those aren't in the Constitution. That's not a constitutional requirement. There's nothing legal about the requirement of pursuit of happiness.
In the Declaration.
Well, it's in the preamble to the Constitution.
But
the preamble is not
life.
Legal language. The preamble is like, look, we created this contract, and here's the purpose of the contract. That's what the preamble is. It's not law. It's not constitutional law. Oftentimes they try to bastardize what it says and use it as if it's law, but it's not. The law is contained in Articles 1 through 7. The preamble is simply an explanation of why they created that Constitution. But the Constitution does not grant states the ability to be in the Union and set their own immigration policy. So once California started setting its own immigration policy, they were in violation of the contract. And that needed to be dealt with, but nobody would deal with it. The reason why nobody would deal with it is because we had forces in our federal government who agreed with what they were doing. And so they used the resources of the federal government not only to allow it, but to help it happen. We send money down to South America to create pamphlets to teach them how to break into our own country. That's done with federal money. So
and we have all these sanctuary cities now coming into play that are harboring people that are criminals.
See, this is the problem, Al. Everything is broken. Our system is completely broken. You just haven't seen it deteriorate to the point where that makes sense to you yet, and most people haven't. But I promise you, we are completely broken. We crossed the line. It's a done deal. It's just a matter of watching the deterioration of our society as the result of having broken the system. And that's what you're witnessing now. The broken part is done. Now we're watching what happens when you break a system.
Right. And I don't think we would disagree, or a lot of people would disagree, that America is broken. The question is, how do you get it back? And one alternative is the revolution again. Although I will only tell you, the reason I always hem and haw on a revolution is I think there is so much as the intelligence of putting together countries and all the corrupt things, it's still there. You have a revolution and start over again, you're going to be back right where we are right now in about 2 years, because that stuff doesn't disappear. It's like you can't know it. The people that were already involved in that, they're already going to come back. And you're going to have China and the other dictators.
But in a revolution, Al, you get rid of those people. Somebody wins.
Nah. They always say it never happens. It doesn't happen.
It did. It happened here for 200 years.
All over America. Huh?
It happened here for 200 years.
Well, I don't think it did. I mean, it's always been deteriorating. I don't think you ever had a clean sweep.
Well, sure, but you had a period of time,
and you didn't have the intelligence that you have now.
But you had a very, very long period of time where the original rules were followed relatively well.
But you didn't have the kind of technology we had now. Things happen so much faster now. I think you would be right back within months. You'd be back to right where we are now. In my view,
not if the good guys win. That's what a revolution is, Al. If we're going to have a revolution, those people you're talking about, you don't leave them alive and walking around to cause trouble. You deal with the enemy. And when the enemy is broken and ineffective and has no ability to fight anymore and no power whatsoever, then you can recreate a society and go back to living your life. But if you fight and you leave those people alive to cause trouble, then sure, the minute you try to create a government, they're right back causing trouble. You have to win.
Greg, you know what this sounds like, though? It sounds like the liberals right now talking about going and getting all the Trump people. It just doesn't sound good. And I know where you're going, and I know it's not.
It is.
I know the heart of it.
Same thing,
but we're back to the same situation. We'll be fighting endlessly.
No,
it'll always be violence.
Okay. Yes, Al. In the history of the world, there will always be fighting, and there always has been fighting. But what we're talking about is, can we create, for any period of time, a level of peace by defeating the bad guys, by removing them? They're going to come back. Their families are going to procreate. Evil is always in the world. It's going to come back, but that's not a reason not to deal with it. The fact that you're going to have to deal with it again is not a reason to not deal with it. It's just a fact of the world.
I would agree with you. However, I thought America was set up special where we weren't going down that path anymore. We were going to do it once.
It was.
We put in laws, and we were a moral country. And we had to deal with it that way.
I know. That ended in the 19th century. It's done. You can't deal with it that way anymore.
Well, the only thing I'll say then, if it ended in the 19th century, it will end again, but even quicker when we have a revolution.
Maybe
not. It will just
keep
ending, and the ends will come quicker.
There's evidence that it will cycle, and there's evidence that it will work for a period of time. There's no evidence as to how long it will last. It's going to depend on how good at it we are. And that same technology can be used to help. It doesn't have to be our downfall. It can be how we defeat the enemy.
So, but why isn't it now? See, I think that's
because
the problem.
Because nobody's doing it. Everybody's just laying down on the ground and letting the jackbooted thugs of our political class kick us in the head.
So why won't they do that again? But this shouldn't be a never-ending conversation. I just think the problem is bigger than what we're talking about in the revolution.
You keep making me say the same thing over and over again. It will happen again. But that's not a reason. That's not the fact that there's going to be a bad guy again someday is not a reason to not deal with the bad guy that's in your face right now.
And we would agree with that. It's just how we do it. I just think the bloodshed and revolution, we're going to be back so quickly. I don't want
bloodshed and revolution. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I hope this is what we get to do. I'm just telling you that historically there is no other solution. It doesn't work any other way. It's just the way. It's just a fact of life. I don't like it. I know you don't like it. None of us want to live in a war zone, but I'm telling you, the reality of the world is this is just how it works, and we can either continue to be abused, or we can defend ourselves and say no, or we can fight it out with the bad guys and hope we win. And they're going to fight it out and hope they win because they want control. We're fighting just to be free. They're fighting to tell us what to do and to keep a lid on us. Well, who's the bad guy here?
No, I understand, Greg. I was just hoping that, and it's not a hope like Pollyanna kind of hope, but we did create a country of laws. If we can't follow law, every revolution is not going to help us from now on. It's a moral issue that's not going to be solved right now by revolution. Let's move on. I got another topic.
The final word is every revolution that's ever happened has had some effect, some good, some bad, some lasted longer, some lasted shorter. That's just how it works. But you keep saying that since that's the case, then we should just roll over.
Oh, no. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying I understand that. I just think that in today's day and age, you'll be right back where you were a lot quicker than in the past. And I just see it as never ending today because we become so polarized. If we really can't fix it with law and rule of law that we created a very special country, I think we're going to become something very different then. And all I'm saying on this is pleading to Americans to use every little bit of law and things that we have to be bold and stand up. And I think we could still take over the country. I would just hate to see it go the other way. But we agree. But let me move on to a guy.
And that would work if the system weren't broken, Al. But nobody's following. Where am I supposed to go to have the law enforced? Where is this place in the United States where the actual law is going to be properly and reasonably enforced the way it's supposed to be? That doesn't exist. That's one of the reasons we have the problem is because that's not happening, and it hasn't happened for a long, long time. Gotcha. I mean, I get it. I wish you could go to court and solve all these problems or have an election, but that's done. The elections are frauded. The court system is manipulated. We're off law. There's no law saving us anymore. We're going to have to save ourselves.
All right, so let's move on to another topic that I thought would be good for today, too. It's just Rush Limbaugh because he passed away yesterday. We kind of knew that was coming. I could sense it really when a week or so had gone by, hadn't come back on radio. You thought, oh, amazing how he kept coming back. And I thought, wow, he's going through some serious stuff, but he's come back to me on the radio. But what I really want to talk about, quite an inspirational figure, no matter what people, and I think he was always, the left loved to destroy him because he really broke open the gates of talk radio, kind of made talk cool again. And I think that was one of Rush's thing was to bring kind of political talk into mainstream a little bit more, maybe get people excited about listening to a guy talk about politics, which probably was a pretty boring topic, or just about government or things going on. So I think he did a good job. The one thing, though, in Roanoke, if you lived in Roanoke, I moved to Roanoke in 1984. And Rush Limbaugh, if I'm not mistaken, I was trying to find this. Bill Bratton was the program director, and I know he's a mutual friend, Bill, from WFIR back in the early 80s. He put Rush Limbaugh on Roanoke station. I think Rush was our station was number 70-something. We were quite early in adapting Rush Limbaugh. He's up to 600 stations now. We were number 70-something in Roanoke. And I always remember when Rush came on, listening to Rush and thinking, whoa, this was really cool. I loved government politics. He was a guy that had a great voice. It's kind of a mix of a bunch of different things, a great voice, a comforting voice, and one that talked about other things besides politics, but brought political things so that you could hear it and kind of enjoy it. The one thing, though, that always amazed me, and it's not a slant on Rush, but how effective Rush really was is a great question to bring up. Because if you think about when Rush came on board, it was with George Bush Sr., so kind of a weak Republican. And then you went into 2 terms of Clinton while Rush was on the air. And then you went into 2 terms of George.
Remember the Clinton days when they would have the bumper, America under siege, day 378. Yeah. That was hilarious.
Right. But then you went into George W. Bush, who kind of a lukewarm person. Then you went into Obama. And the only person I can say that kind of was more like a Rush Limbaugh kind of guy was Trump. But that's at the end of his 30-something years on radio. So really doing his 30 years, we kind of elected lukewarm Republicans and liberal Democrats. So the effectiveness of Rush in the American psyche, making America really go back to the Constitution I think that's kind of up in the air. But a great guy and quite a philanthropist too. I mean, Rush had a heart of gold. The things he would do for the community, he was very wealthy. I read this net worth of Rush Limbaugh was $500 million.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I know. And when you think about it, this is a great lesson, though, about eternity and a little bit of a spiritual thing here. You can have all the money in the world, and Rush did good things with it, but it's over for Rush. He's gone. He amassed all that wealth, everything. I mean, pass on to his wife and stuff like that. But, there does come a time and a day when it's over, right? It's over. Your time on earth is over. So use money wisely and use your influence wisely, my thing, because it could be over any day. Anyway, your thoughts on Rush. What do you think? I mean, what do you think of Rush, just as a media voice?
In the very beginning of my political activity, which 30 years ago, I thought Rush was awesome. And the reason why, at that point, I had a very superficial understanding of the political of the political goings on, and what was reported every day and what the media was showing us. And what the politicians wanted us to focus on. I didn't realize, the misdirection, the informational shell game that politicians play. So in the very beginning, and Rush talked about those things, would break that stuff down, would talk to callers, answer questions. I found that very interesting. I was also excited because he was saying things in the media and his show that were true and that nobody else would say. You could, it didn't matter what news channel you watched, didn't matter what newspaper you read, you got the same kind of mediocre, middle of the road, leaning left liberal nonsense. And then Rush was saying something completely different, and he was the only one doing it. And it was interesting because the stuff, as you watch the news, when I would see a news report and I'd go, well, that's not true. That's not true. They're lying about that. There was nowhere to look for the truth to be told. And then you would listen to Rush and you'd hear it there. And that was why he was so quickly an enormous success, is because he was the only game in town. And everybody was in the late 80s, early 90s, we were starving for something in the media to tell the other side of the story, because it wasn't being told. The news is always telling us the leftist lie, the establishment lie, which for the longest time was the leftist lie. Now we know that the establishment of the right is also involved in that lie, because you see that on Fox News. If you want the lie of the right-wing establishment, you watch Fox News. If you want the lie of the left-wing establishment, you watch any other news. But altogether, they are the establishment of thought that you're supposed to believe, and that's to keep everybody under your thumb. That didn't exist yet back then. There was no Fox News. There was only Rush. Rush is responsible for a lot of changes. I mean, AM radio was this close at the time to being completely shut down, and the FCC reallocating the bandwidth from AM radio to other purposes, because the stations were going off the air, the licenses were being let go. There was no money in AM anymore. The people who listened to AM radio were dying. They were our great grandparents. They were leaving us, and the whole thing was shutting down. And what Rush found is that because nobody cared about AM radio in the media, it was considered defunct. That's how he snuck in. Rush couldn't have done what he did on cable television. He couldn't have done what he did on broadcast television. Nobody would have let him. And if somebody did let him, they'd have taken him out. They'd have had to fight, because they could not have him on TV doing that. So what did he do? He got on AM radio and he slid into the media in a medium that the establishment didn't care about, that everybody had decided was dead, and so they weren't worried about him. Who cares about what that guy says on AM radio? Nobody listens to AM radio. Well, what they forgot is that everybody had an AM radio. And here was this guy, the only guy, saying something that half the country believed, but nobody would say, and now all of a sudden there's somebody saying it. Boom! he becomes an instant success. It was huge, and it was huge fast. And now all of a sudden, over the decade that followed that, and even up till today, AM radio is a moneymaker back with a vengeance. There are station groups are finding AM licenses that they can turn back on and connect to their system and broadcast conservative talk radio, put Rush on, do whatever. That wasn't happening in the 80s, but starting in the 90s, it did happen because Rush made it a financial boon for everybody. Think of all the jobs that were created all throughout radio, not just in Rush's organization, but in the entire whole of radio. New sales jobs were created, new management jobs were created, new on-air talent jobs were created, new engineering jobs were created. All of a sudden, we had a boon of people employed by the AM radio industry that was all gone. And it happened solely because Rush reinvigorated AM radio. He saved it.
Well, let me ask you this. There were other radio personalities on AM radio, right? I mean, I remember
Sure.
Farber. There was a guy named Farber. Even Bortz. Bortz seemed like he had been on for maybe before Rush. I don't know. He was an old timer.
But none of them. They were doing their shows and overseeing the death of AM radio. They weren't saving it. They were kind of holding on to the last vestiges of the AM ship going down in the North Atlantic until Rush came. And when Rush came, he bailed out the water. The ship floated. Then they redid the ship and made it pretty again. Then they built 10 more ships. I mean, Rush is responsible for all that.
So I know. And you did mention some of the things that Rush had. So there were others that were talking about issues that Rush did, but so there was something special about Rush, though.
Well,
right?
There were a number of things special about Rush. First of all, he was an excellent broadcaster. He wasn't a classically trained broadcaster. He was a self-taught broadcaster. He didn't go to college for broadcasting like I did. Okay, he just had a knack for it. He also had a knack for understanding people and how they would react and what they would like and what they wouldn't like. And his radio show was designed around that. One of the things that he did that nobody else did was, Rush never had topics. Rush never did, okay, Monday we're going to talk about gun control, and Wednesday we're going to talk about abortion, and next Thursday we're going to have this guest on, and we're going to talk about the degradation of the legal system. No, Rush didn't do that. But the other people you talk about, they did a lot of that. But none of that stuff was a big draw for listeners because, they were too general and they weren't specific to what people were experiencing today. What Rush did was designed a show that would talk about what people were experiencing today. What's going on in Washington, D.C., what's going on in the world, what's going on in your state capital today that is affecting you. And he would talk about what all the other news people were talking about. Whatever you wake up that morning, that the intelligentsia of the media wanted all of us to be focused on. That's what everybody's all whipped up about by noon. So Rush took that. This is what everybody's scared of. This is what everybody's upset by. This is what everybody's interested in. So we're going to talk about that. And he brought his sensibilities and understanding and his perspective every single day to the things that the culture were making important today. So, he talked about gun control, but he only talked about gun control when there was a gun control bill being argued about, and the news was about gun control, and people were worried about losing their guns because they see a new gun control bill, so he talks about gun control. But he didn't talk about gun control just on any given day out of the blue when there's nothing important in the world of gun control going on, right?
So
that was very smart.
Do you think part of the media that got upset at him was it seemed like people would wait until Rush, and he would state this always, that he kind of had, everybody stopped talking after Rush told you what he thought. That was it, So he would kind of ridicule the other media by saying, they'll have their little speech, and then when I say it, it's pretty much what it's done. So I think a lot of the media got upset at him because they would be blabbing, and then everybody would wait till hear what Rush says about it.
A lot of the media got upset, one, because because tens of millions of people across the country were no longer believing what they were putting in the news because Rush was telling them that's not true. Here's what's really going on. They saw the beginning of losing their complete lock on information. So Rush became a target for them. Now, fortunately, Rush was so good at what he did. He was so unique and so loved by that side of the political equation that they couldn't hurt him. They tried numerous times. There were multiple attempts to take down Rush Limbaugh, and they all failed because, for the same reason that Trump won the election 4 years ago, because Rush's people were dedicated and they weren't listening to all this crap that the left was telling them. And that's the same, that's what Trump's people did. They loved Trump and they weren't listening to all this crap, right?
Well, let me make one point too. I think this is the real legacy of Rush Limbaugh, and a real legacy, I think, of a good leader. And this may sound kind of like a little slant on Rush, but it really isn't. I mean, the fact that Rush has passed away, I think he did such a good job of inspiring other people that there are a horde of other radio talk show hosts, and it's amazing to me how good they are. Like, I've listened to a lot of substitute hosts that have come in for Rush, and they are very good, very good. And I think the reason they're very good is because of Rush. Rush gave them the ability to not, like you say, maybe have a certain format. They are, the Mark Steins of the world. There's a couple other guys that have actually done a great job on Rush that I think are very intelligent, very witty. And Sean Hannity being, of course, Sean substituted on Rush in the very beginning. I know you don't like it. But there are just a group and a diverse group. I think, you have Sean on one side. The one thing I like is that you have a diverse group of talk show hosts that follow different things, but there are a lot of great personalities out there. Glenn Beck, obviously another angle, and Glenn has a lot of substitute hosts that I think are very good, and I wouldn't mind listening to them. They're very insightful, and they have a lot of different angles. So the one thing that I think Rush did well is he didn't suck in all the energy, and now if he's gone, it's dead. I think there are a lot of areas out there now across the country that have great talk show hosts, and this media is alive and ready to continue, in my view. I think that's what they have.
And this is one we're going to watch play out. We'll see who's right. But I think with the Godfather gone, that the enemies of conservative talk radio are going to win the battle. I think they're going to take it down. He was the anchor that everybody could group together around and be protected by. And with him gone, I think they will very easily over the next few years kill it. Especially when they're willing to go to such drastic lengths in these political battles. Now that we have full-fledged organized cancel culture, now that we have online political murders, now that we have, they're going to take it down. With Rush gone, it'll be much, much easier, and they have to. They have to get rid of that because they can't leave any mechanism of communication open for anything other than the centralized, pre-prescribed, approved message of the political class. And so
I got you. Well, I know you and I both hope you're wrong.
Oh yeah,
right.
But I won't be wrong now.
Okay, but we'll be on different sides.
I promise.
I'm on the other side that there's going to be a great resurgence.
So we'll see. The first thing back when I still listened to Rush and I was still thought that what was going on in these shows was important. The first thing I think that ever impressed me was Rush explaining baseline budgeting back in the early 90s.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Up to that point, we had 2 decades of budget battles, a very public right versus left, Democrat versus Republican budget battles, and everybody constantly claiming, the Republicans constantly claiming we've cut the budget, because that's what they promised was to downsize was to get rid of the deficit, to eliminate the debt. They were constantly saying we've cut the deficit, we've cut the budget, and when Democrats wanted to attack Republicans to get the Democrat people voting for them, they would make the same claim. They would accuse Republicans of cutting the budget. They've cut funding for this and they've cut funding for that, and they're cutting funding. But what nobody seemed to realize for a couple of decades is if all this cutting was really going on, why was the budget bigger and bigger and bigger? Yeah. Nobody on average, people didn't pay attention to that. Democrats thought for sure Republicans were cutting the budget like crazy and we're all going to starve and die. And Republicans believed, yeah, my Republican elected officials, they're cutting the budget just like they promised. It's awesome. The truth was none of that was happening. The budget was always bigger. Well, how are they cutting if it keeps getting bigger? Because what they were cutting was this mythical number, this mythical baseline of adding 15% to every single thing in the budget. And then you cut 5%. So you get a 10% increase, and you can call it a cut. But you tell everybody it's a cut. And the Republicans and the Democrats were colluding in that messaging. Okay. They were on the same page and lying to everybody. And Rush explained what I just explained. Rush, on numerous shows, over and over, he went through baseline budgeting. Every time there was a budget fight, every time, he went through that. And for the first time, there was a group of people who understood. Now we know why there's always cuts, because they're not really cuts. The whole thing's fake. We're being lied to. Right. We're cutting off of an increase, which leaves a net increase. There were no cuts. Rush, nobody. We would never have known that likely without Rush Limbaugh in great numbers, without Rush Limbaugh championing it. There were a number of things over the years that Rush kind of outed to the political world that the Republicans and the Democrats, the establishment of our political class, were keeping under a lid. Rush broke a lot of that open and caused a lot of trouble. Now, ultimately, while we can talk about all these great things, ultimately, if the mission was to free us, was to fix these problems, was to even incrementally get back to where things should be, it was a failure, because everything, by every measurable thing you would measure government by, we're worse off today than we were when Rush broadcast the very first time ever. So maybe it made things get worse slower. Maybe Rush helped flatten the curve on the downward slide. Maybe not. But ultimately, it didn't save us. There was a period of time when I thought it would. In the beginning years of my political activity, when I first started working elections and when I first started, getting involved, I was under the misguided conception that we had a chance to win, that we could actually reinstill constitutional governance and we could take back the rights that we're supposed to have that are guaranteed. And we could put the government back in the box it's supposed to be in to do the job we need it to do, so that we could all be free and prosperous and live in peace and go about our lives. I still thought that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. I still thought that might have been possible. But I'm on the other side of 30 years of that, political activity. And having experienced everything that I've gotten involved in, I see now that was never the case. It's not going to be the case. At best, we're going to muck around in the gradual decline of this society, and it's not getting better by working the next election or donating to a political campaign or being a candidate yourself or getting the right people or taking over the party from the inside, or all these things that, these are things that, for 30 years, I believed all that stuff. And we did every one of those over and over and over again. We kept believing we just got to do it better. We just got to do it right. That's just not how it works. The flow of American society is not in that direction. It's in the opposite direction. And that's
the flow of humanity. And I would also say the flow of humanity.
And that, unfortunately, is how the world affairs play out. There's very little that can change the course of a raging river. All you can really do is manipulate a little bit, throw up some dams to slow the water along the way, but it's going to go to the bottom. It's going to go where it's going to go, and you're not going to stop it. And if you try to stop it, it will break you. So,
I agree with you, Greg. And as we're getting towards the end here,
that's how political human affairs work.
Conversation. 2,000 years ago, they did crucify Jesus too. So, we may think things are failures. I think actually, that is the direction that humanity goes. But there are lessons, I think, to also realize that turning America or turning the world into some wonderful utopia is not in the cards. I mean, it is somewhat of a management of decline.
But who's trying to turn America into a utopia?
Well, we all would love it to be a free society where everybody has their rights to do good and all that. I just don't think that's going to happen. That's my utopia.
It's very simple. All we need is for the system to work the way it did when the Constitution was ratified, except blacks and women need to be included in all men are created equal. Because men didn't mean men. It didn't mean the male of the species. It meant mankind. But when we created this country, we created a very good structure, a very reasonable one, a very effective one, and we left out all the females and left blacks as slaves. And that's the catalyst to why we ended up where we are now, because dealing with those two issues allowed political people to deal with them politically for their own personal gain. And those issues, black issues, women's issues, and today we have 24 more, those became political weapons to be used by power-hungry politicians to expand their power and control using the system that we have. I got
you. So that would be the utopia I'm talking about.
But getting back to a time that's not even utopia.
But everybody had freedom. I'm just saying
that's not utopia.
Okay. Well, no, I'm just saying in your view of trying to get back to something that we had 200 years ago, except this, blah, 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 which I think is not going to happen because mankind kind of goes in that direction. So all I'm saying is I think there is a sense of being obedient for an individual. What can you do besides getting depressed and giving up is you individually have got to do the things that are right. You've got to be, as a Christian, I think you got to believe in the Savior so that you don't freak out on all this stuff and realize that this isn't it, because that can be depressing. If this is it, we'd all be depressed because the world is kind of going in that direction.
This is it on.
And just to leave it like that, I think you can still fight battles. I think that's great. God, we are here for a purpose. I mean, I don't know if it's to save America so that we're back to 200 years ago, but there is a purpose. And I think, we do our little part and we got to be kind of somewhat content with it, or we're just going to lose our mind. And I think we just going back and reflecting on Rush a little bit. I think, Rush was put on earth. He had a great talent. And I think he definitely did some things, whatever he could, no one's Superman, whatever he could, the best of his ability. And I think he did a great job. Well, obviously we all have flaws.
There was a lot more Rush could have done. And Rush didn't do it.
There is a lot more all of us can do, right?
But Rush didn't do it because it wasn't beneficial to Rush or Rush's show. In the last decade, Rush started to be entirely more honest about the dysfunction of the Republican Party. He started becoming entirely more honest about Republican politics not solving the problem either because of the issues in the Republican Party. Now he wouldn't have said those things in the 90s, and he didn't say those things in the 2000s. That's when I started saying those things, and that's when Rush and I broke. Was back in the early 2000s when it became obvious that the Republican Party was not being honest with us. They were lying to us and then backstabbing us. We elect Republicans that say, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and they would do the exact opposite. And Rush continued to be their cheerleader all the way up into the 2010s. He continued to kind of sweep that under the rug, and he continued to beat the drum of vote Republican, Republicans are the solution, vote Republicans, Democrats suck. In the 2010s, after the 8 years of Bush, and he saw what happened in 2010 when the Republicans took back over Congress and they didn't do what they told us they'd do if we gave them Congress back. Right. You started to see Rush say what I had been saying 10 years earlier. No, the Republicans are screwing us. We're getting a raw deal, and we can't just take everything they say and go fight the Democrats with it because the Republicans are lying to us. And they've become part of the problem. They're part of the problem too. Rush started gradually working into that. And I was happy to see that. If Rush had done that in the 90s, If Rush had been honest about that situation 15 years earlier, we might be in a better position today. There might not have been a George W. Bush to usher in Barack Obama. We might have had a decent president in the 2000s. I mean, instead we got an establishment tool who was being controlled by Cheney and the Republican establishment. But what if Rush had honestly said, okay, yeah, Democrats versus Republicans, but let me tell you what, just electing Republicans, that's not going to do it, because they're not going to cut the budget. They're not going to protect the border. They're not going to secure your rights. They're not going to protect your Second Amendment rights. They're not, if Rush had been honest about that, we might have been able to fix that problem before it got as bad as this, and we may be in better shape today. But Rush came to it late, because honestly, I get it. If Rush had said those things in the 90s, if he'd have started talking bad about Republicans in the way they deserved, it would have turned off his audience, because they didn't want to hear that. What people wanted to hear was Democrat good, the other team bad, my team good, and my team was the GOP.
I know, but I think you're doing a very, very, very broad brush. I mean, you go back and listen to some shows of Rush when he first started off. That wasn't true, that he just said Republicans good, Democrats bad. I mean, I think we were at a different time 30 years ago or 20 years ago, but I would not – all I'm saying, and I'm not going to argue this, I mean, I'm just saying I don't think it was as broad a brush as you were saying. I definitely remember some pushing with even George W. Bush, George H. Bush.
Rush would be critical specifically about specific things that a Republican did wrong. He would expose it. He didn't hide from it. But what I'm saying is that the general tenor of Rush's message is like yours. Yeah, they're doing some stuff that sucks, but they're all we got. So we got to get out there and vote for them, put them in power. That ended.
Well, but push them. But he always said pressure them to do the right thing.
And that didn't work.
There's a great quote. Hold on.
It was never
There's
going.
A great quote from somebody.
I know.
That says, well, wait a minute. There's a great quote from somebody that says, you never elect righteous people or people that will do good. You elect ordinary human beings with all their frailties, and you force them to do good. And I totally agree with that. You're not going to elect anybody that's just righteous on their own, wanting to do good. People in government have egos about the size.
We have elected somebody like that in a number of times. We elected you in Roanoke County 6 years ago.
Well,
7 years ago.
Right.
And
I'm just saying in general.
We elected Ron Paul. Texas elected Ron Paul. Ron Paul was in the Congress for decades. Ron Paul never sold out liberty. Ron Paul didn't get on television and lie to people about what the GOP was doing. He was critical. Ron Paul had his son.
But you're almost proving my point, though, Greg. I mean, you're naming 2 or 3 people. I'm just saying, in general mass, you're electing people that are somewhat with big egos and corrupt. And our job is to force them to do right.
Right, but you're not forcing them to do right when you tell them, I don't care who you nominate. I don't care how bad the Republican is. I'll vote for them because they're not as bad as the Democrat. When you tell the Republican Party that, and that's what they get told every single election cycle, that's the general message from Republicans. I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote Republican no matter what because the Democrats are so much worse. Once you tell the Republicans that, you can't force them to do anything because they know you're going to vote for them no matter what.
Greg, we can't blame everything on the Republicans. Every presidential election I've ever been in, or even every congressional or senator, there's always a primary. It's the people that choose the wrong Republican. There have been great people that have run for office in a primary, and whatever it is, we have the opportunity in a primary or a convention to choose the Republican we feel the best. And we don't do it. That's not a Republican Party fault.
Wait, you kind of have that opportunity. You don't fully have that opportunity because every bit of information that you get about those candidates is fraudulent. You're being manipulated.
But Greg, you can't blame them. They want to win. We got to blame ourselves a little bit. Figure out these guys.
I blame them when there is a collusion of fraudulent information. I don't blame a candidate for saying whatever it takes to get elected, except for I blame them for lying, right? But what I'm talking about is the collusion of the leadership at the top, of the establishment political leadership, of the collusion to disseminate only information that will achieve the desired outcome they wish. And they get that all the time. They didn't get it in 2016. And that's why you saw a 4-year temper tantrum that ended with the biggest frauded election we've ever seen in our lives, with a lie about an insurrection in DC, and with Trump now being sued into oblivion because they didn't, for the first time in our lifetimes, they weren't able to keep control of the situation, and the person they didn't want got elected. But they fixed that problem.
Powerful, but Greg, let's take a little bit of hope from some of these things. If they're so powerful after all these years, 2016 came along, you had 17 candidates, and we chose somebody they didn't want. How much power could they have?
They have all the power. They just made a mistake. Powerful people make mistakes, but what did they do? They took care of the situation, Al. Have you been watching for the last 4 years? They took care of the problems that caused them to lose that election so that they would never have it happen again. And that's what you're watching going on around us. They fixed that problem. They're powerful. And if you don't see it, you're not looking, because we're living it.
But again, this is a battle, right? I mean, I'm not ignorant of the fact that we have a battle, but the one thing I do like is, hey, we have a war going on. We just won a battle 4 years ago. So I got you. But if it was as bad, we would have all been.
We did not win a battle 4 years ago. Okay, Trump won a battle 4 years ago for himself. We didn't get anything, but the president of the United States stopped declaring war on business in the United States for 4 years. That's it. But we didn't.
And he
win.
didn't involve us in any wars, Greg.
We didn't.
You should love that. I know.
It. But today I have less rights than I had 4 years ago, and Trump himself is responsible for many of those things. He didn't just watch. He wasn't just ineffective at stopping these things. Trump participated in the degradation of civil rights for every American. When he writes an executive order declaring a gun part illegal, there's no authority for that, and he's violated our rights because the federal government has no authority whatsoever to regulate firearms. It says it right in the Constitution. Well, Trump didn't just let firearms get regulated illegally by the federal government. He participated in it. Trump was not a win for rights. Trump was an anomaly. He was a win for him, but it was a lose for anything that matters. And you got to start differentiating the difference between political people winning battles against each other and the people winning battles for freedom.
Well, I disagree with you. And the next show we have.
Wait. You don't think there's a difference in those two things?
We're going to go on that. The next show we have, I think we need to do a little Ben Franklin, and that's the positives that Trump did and the negatives. And nowhere on earth have I ever claimed that Trump is a messiah. Okay, he does. Reagan was not a messiah.
No,
okay.
But wait. I didn't say you did.
Right.
I didn't say you did. You just said we had a victory in 2016, and I was explaining why
I think definitely
we did not have a victory. Trump and people who wanted him to be president had a victory, but the Constitution didn't have a victory. My rights did not have a victory. None of that actually happened. The re-establishment of liberty in the United States did not have a victory in 2016.
I disagree with you, Greg. And on the next show, Tuesday's show, we'll do a little investigation because I'm going to look at a lot of things that he did very, very well that gave us more liberties.
Give me one. What liberty do I have now that I did not have?
Victory.
Wait, what liberty? Just one. What liberty do I have now?
Do a show because I'm going to list them.
I just want one. Obviously, there's some. What liberty do I have now that he got back for me by winning in 2016? Just pick one. Just one.
I would say that he did. This is not a liberty per se.
I want a liberty. I don't care. I do not care about victories of a Republican policy over a Democrat policy, or a Republican candidate over a Democrat candidate, or somebody winning the war of tweets. I want to know, because the only battle that matters is the ones that win for liberty. That's what this entire country was created for. So I want to know
Right.
what liberty he won back for me. Because I'm telling you, there aren't any. I'm not freer now. I'm less free today. There was no battle. There was no battle won for liberty, unless you know of one.
I would say on like the pro-life movement, it gave more exposure, but also on school choice and charter schools trying to move away from government schools that he put DeVos in. That was a great proponent of that, and a lot of things that the Democrats were just furious about that she put in. That's the only reason why I say, because I was thinking about school choice, and I know that she did a bunch of things, but I need to go and look at them.
I know she did a bunch of things, I was glad she did them, since they weren't going to shut down the Department of Education, which is what should have happened.
You're running something overnight; it's just not going to happen.
I understand that, but she didn't do anything that made any family freer with the education of their children. She might have also not a dictator. She might have stopped it from getting less free.
Not a dictator,
huh?
Right? They're not dictators. They can't do things overnight that you could visibly see. All I'm asking.
I know. What I'm saying is, Al, you still haven't told me what freedom he got back for me. You're telling me he put in Betsy DeVos and she mucked around with the education system and made it not as bad and stopped the Democrats. But what I want to know what freedom me or my family got back as a result of him choosing Betsy DeVos to run the Department of Education.
Till next Tuesday, so it's an articulate conversation.
You can't even give me one. You can't.
Well, because
you've had all this time with Trump, and off the top of your head, you cannot think of one specific liberty that he won back, and you're claiming he had victories for liberty. Well, what are they? Just one. Give me one.
No, that's not what I said at all. I didn't say we had victories for liberty. I said we won a battle because you said the Republican Party controls everything, and I said when Trump won, they did not control him because he was not their pick. He won.
I know.
He was a disruptor.
And that was
right?
Right. So, but that's not the point.
But that was my point, though.
No, you said
that was not your point.
You said we won in 2016.
A battle, right.
And I said we did not win.
By the Republican Party.
It depends on how you define we. Because I define we as in we and our liberty won. Not we got some guy we like won, but nothing, but we didn't. You're confusing. You're confusing.
Well, hold on.
See,
the conversation was
you are confusing.
That the Republican Party controls everything. I said they don't control everything because we won a battle with Trump winning. He broke away from the Republican Party controlling who their person's going to be. If you roll back the tape, you will see that you will see that you said whoever the Republicans put up, that's our choice. We have no choice. I say we won a battle in 2016 because we did not go with their choice.
I did not say
you
that
brought
was
up the
always.
liberty thing.
I just said generally, Al, that's just what always happens. And I agree. There's this one time it didn't happen. I agree with you.
Okay.
But I don't.
So
but
all
again,
I'm asking,
it's not about that. It's about what effect does that actually have? Because the purpose of politics is to protect my rights. That's the battle I want to win. I don't care. I don't care about Republicans beating Democrats. I don't care about Democrats beating Republicans. I don't care about conservative Republicans beating liberal Republicans, because in the end, I'm still less free. What difference does any of that make?
Right, but that wasn't the question that you started the thing with, and why I gave you Trump being a good winner.
Now, you're just taking a general way.
Trump broke away from.
You're just taking a generality that I said and trying to win an argument by finding a specific instance that doesn't follow the generality. And I already agree with the specific instance. But
did he not remove many regulations that we have in businesses and why businesses started to boom? Did he not fight against the Chinese?
I said that. I said the only thing he did of consequence that had an effect was the president was no longer at war with business in America
and other countries, which is a good thing for you and a good thing for me that we're not involved in these endless wars. But let me list them, Greg. I think it's appropriate for even our audience. Let me list them, and I will bring back a list next week, and then we can go through that list and see whether you felt Trump did any good at all.
All I want on the list is what freedoms I regained, what constitutional requirements were reinstituted. I don't care who got what position. I don't care who is ambassador to what. I don't care what.
No, removing regulations. We'll go through some specific things that he removed, which took a burden off of businesses that may employ you to help them. So these are things that I think are important.
Sure.
It's not going to happen overnight. Right?
It's not going to happen at all. It's an anomaly, Al. Wake up. The establishment fixed the problem, and they won't have another Trump. They made sure we don't get to pick a president anymore. It's going to be done for us because they fraud the election.
I totally disagree with you, Greg. I totally disagree with you on that. And that hasn't happened yet.
What election did you see last year, Al? Because the one I watched got frauded. We don't know who won that election. How can you disagree? Do you know who got the most votes then, Al? Who got the most legitimate votes of actual legal registered voters?
Election, and I disagree. You're saying we never have another election, which I disagree. I think we will. I think that's the way Americans are. We're going to make some changes.
No, I said we're never going to have another election where we actually know who wins. They're frauded.
And I say I disagree with you having that definite of a thing.
Okay, so what's going to happen then to change the situation that we're in?
Greg, I don't live in the future yet. I'm just saying that I think there's enough people.
All right, then what would you advocate doing that would fix the situation?
Greg, I'm not getting into another show where I've already over an hour. Let's go wait till next week. This is not a 2-hour show. Next week, Trump, pluses and minuses, and have an open mind.
I have an open mind.
For the American people, plus and minuses to bring us back to the Constitution.
Individuals.
Not Republican, Democrat.
America is about individual liberty. It's not about group liberty. So
yes, let's talk about that next week.
Whatever you come up with, I want to hear what he did to reinstill individual liberty for specific Americans.
That's exactly what we're going to do next week.
And it can't be economic related. Because I've already conceded that's the only area that he did anything.
Do not pigeonhole me. Do not pigeonhole me.
I'm not pigeonholing you. What I'm saying,
Al,
what I'm saying is I concede already. But you don't have to say anything. He stopped the war against business somewhat, and the economy got better. I agree with that.
He's not the Messiah,
but that's not enough.
He's not the Messiah.
That's not enough to matter.
Wait till next week.
No economics. I want to hear.
No, you're not going to pigeonhole me.
Then I don't want to talk about it.
Next week, we'll talk.
Because I already agree that economically he made improvements temporarily.
You can't just take something off the table and say, now what else? No,
I agree with you. You don't have to present that material to me, Al. I already agree. I'm not going to listen to it. I'm not going to hear you state to me what I've already said happened. There's no point to that. I want you to prove to me things that I said didn't happen are happening. Not the one thing that I agree happened. There's no point to that.
Okay. My days always start off so great on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Next Tuesday.
All right,
see you
Tuesday.
Then. See ya. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great day.
Next Tuesday, it's going to be great. Show up. Bye.